Gentlemen, have you had an opportunity to look at the minutes from the last meeting?
Yep, no problem with them.
No problem. I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes from the November 20th meeting.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Outgoing correspondence. So the outgoing correspondence all appears to deal with the revocation of chicken permits. Is that correct, Sue?
Yes.
All right. I'll entertain a motion to accept the outgoing correspondence.
Motion to accept.
Second.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And so the incoming correspondence, there appears to be one regarding an asbestos remediation on Albino Road. Is there a motion to accept the
Motion to
incoming?
accept.
Is there a second?
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye. Now is this old
Yeah,
business?
I
What we're
think we
discussing?
should go through old business. Let's go on to other. Paul, is that permissible? Yeah, we're going to go out of order here. Let's go on to other, which is the monthly reports. Sue, these are the new fees that we talked about last time
Yes.
that you're proposing here?
Mm-hmm.
Frozen dessert manufacturer.
What's that?
One of the restaurant breakdowns is frozen dessert manufacturer.
I don't think maybe that was your place, the places.
Yeah.
So that refers to someplace like Sully's versus someone who brings in ice cream from somewhere else.
Do you happen to know where the webinar was? That was just in general online, or was that?
It was online.
Okay.
Sue, was there any follow-up to the measles exposure at TJ Maxx?
No, we only had 3 phone calls as a result of that advisory. 2 of the 3 were from media, and 1 was a resident. And we haven't heard of any positive cases that came out of that exposure.
So what have we had for response to the posting for the health inspector?
I had 20 applicants.
Okay.
So I have interviews set up for tomorrow and Wednesday. We basically are interviewing 5 people.
Okay, very good.
Some of them really didn't meet the qualifications of the job.
They did?
Did
Oh,
not.
They did not, okay. Is Mark assisting in this?
Yes,
review?
both Mark and I.
Okay.
Any motion to accept?
Yeah, I need a motion to accept the
Other?
reports. So moved. Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, we're going to start the public input now on the domestic animal regulations. Some protocol here. I would hope that everyone by now has silenced their cell phones. Note that the meeting is being recorded and televised. One attendee may speak at a time. Please approach the podium, speak into the microphone so it gets picked up. Identify yourself by name and address. Wait to be recognized by the chair. No attendee may speak twice until everyone wishing to speak has spoken once. All remarks are to be addressed to the board, not to other attendees. Remarks must be courteous in language and decorum. Avoid personalities. Please do not allude to others by name or motive. Please no redundancy. If your point has been addressed, please do not address the point a second time. Be short and concise. The board reserves the right to limit each speaker to 3 to 5 minutes. First speaker may approach.
A quick question. The draft that we have in today, is this the current draft?
No, this is where we are
The old
now.
one,
We're
yeah.
going to take input tonight,
There's
and
a-
next Monday night, we'll
Right.
agree on a form.
I think there's another draft after this.
No,
Okay.
there's not.
Hi, Mike Raisbeck, 85 High Street, Precinct 1, Chairman of the Planning Board.
Okay, Mike, let me stop you right now.
Yep.
Okay? I didn't ask for your credentials. Name and
Okay.
address. The fact that you're a town meeting rep, the fact that you're on the planning board gives you no more credibility before this board than anyone else here.
It certainly
Now
does
you
not.
may proceed.
You're correct. I just wanted to be sure that you had received the materials that I sent, basically a revised draft of the proposal that's been circulated. I wanted to make sure that it had gotten to you. I sent a copy to Sue for distribution to all of you, and I sent a copy to Paul as well. Did you get that?
We have seen your suggested revisions.
Yes,
We have
that's-
not
that's-
seen a revised version of anything.
Okay, well, it was within a single document, so you would get the whole thing plus the redlining plus the comments on it if you chose to turn that on. Just wanted to make sure it had gotten to you.
Yes.
Okay, that said, rather than going through it piece by piece, because I'm not at all sure what people are most concerned about, what particular terms, it is something of a restructuring of the draft that Paul provided in order to separate out a little bit better large animals and small animals. I hope that came through. And it made some substantial adjustments based on what's considered generally accepted agricultural practice dealing with chickens. This particularly had to do with matters of cleaning the chicken coops, how you deal with the chicken coops, and so forth. Also some suggestions on the some of the distances that were proposed in there. And finally, the suggestion that a flat limit, I believe you had proposed 6, was not flexible enough to deal with some situations where you have very, very small lots, and certainly 5 or 6 chickens is probably plenty, up to some larger lots, acre, acre and a half, where a larger flock might be appropriate. So that covers in general what my suggestions for your draft said. I think it might be easier at this point to let other people speak if they wish, and then discuss particular points as they come up.
Thank you.
Does that work for you?
We're not going to be engaging in any discussion tonight. We're trying to gather public input. But yes, I think that.
Very good. Okay,
we
then
have
I'm going to sit down and I'll maybe get back in the end of the line a little later.
Thank you.
Douglas Hausler, 10 North Road, Chelmsford. I have several questions, if I may, and trying to understand the source of some of the determinations that are made within this draft. And for example, in proposed section 201-5.2, number 15, all hen houses and pens shall be located not less than 50 feet from an abutting property. My question is the intention of that to be a lot line determination or 50 feet from a resident, the end of a dwelling? What was the intent of that particular provision?
Lot line.
And how did that number of 50 feet get generated?
We have looked at other, again, Doug, I'm not going to engage in discussion per se, but we looked at other communities.
I'm just trying to understand where what the concern was that got to the 50, so I can understand it. Because as it reads now, if a lot of the homes in Chelmsford don't even have 150 feet of linear frontage. If you're in a C zone or you might only have 100 feet of frontage, then by definition here, there's a very good chance you can't have any such pets.
It's a point well taken.
Well, is that the intent of the bylaw? That's the question.
These are draft bylaws. Okay, we're here for public input. This is good input. I understand what you're saying.
I understand. Thank you.
We may be excluding people if these are too restricted. I appreciate the input.
Okay, no,
We will
I
look
understand
at
that. Thank you. The limitations, there's no provision anywhere in here for petitioning for board review of either by special permit of your board or by variance by your board. So I don't see any process, and I'd ask you to consider that, please. Was it purposeful not to have a particular land area requirement?
That's part of the zoning. That's not ours.
Very well. So from this board's perspective, size of lot is immaterial to this board.
That's correct.
Thank you. I apologize for taking your time. I just got a hold of this.
And
will there be more specific guidelines provided by the Board of Health in order to implement or meet the requirements that you're setting forth here? And an example, weekly cleaning of hen houses is required. More frequent cleanings may be required as needed to prevent odor. Will there be some kind of a guideline sheet provided to someone who will perhaps have those types of hen houses that they have to follow so that they don't get in crosshairs with your board?
if that provision stays within our regulation, yes.
Okay. Another question was with respect to the establishment of 100 or 200 feet from high water mark and then 50 feet of any wetlands. And I just wanted to note for the board to consider, please. that even in the wetland protection bylaws of the town, under certain instances, you're allowed to build subject to orders of condition. And I would ask that you consider some type of an order of condition process in section 14, or paragraph 14 of section 201.52, I believe.
Could you give those numbers again?
201-5.2, and subparagraph for section 14. You have it as not less than 50 feet, but even the wetland bylaw in Chelmsford, and I'll do an example, is a comprehensive permit. If someone went for a comprehensive permit, they're allowed to build right up to the edge of wetlands. Again, but that's subject to review and discussion. This doesn't even allow for the discussion, I guess. And that's why I'm asking you to build some provision in there to make sure that people have an opportunity to come before your board. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Adam Brando. I'm from 6 Housatonic Avenue. Ready to go?
That's fine.
We've
sorry, did you
looked
not-
over these draft regulations.
Excuse me, Adam.
Sure.
Carol wasn't able to pick up your address.
6 Housatonic Avenue.
Housatonic.
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 Thank you.
These draft regulations are quite comprehensive. They're 10 pages of material here. There's a lot to review. We've been looking over them, and I really want to put a good amount of emphasis on what the scope is of the Board of Health. Is the Board of Health being too restrictive in general? Things that are a matter of health, I can see. However, things that are a matter of noise, as a rooster may crow, things that are a matter of cleaning the coop on a regular basis, is that a health issue? Distance from a neighbor's property line, is that a health issue? There are many, many examples in here of what I believe the Board of Health overstepping their bounds and overstepping the scope of their authority. There are clearly some zoning bylaws that restrict animals as an accessory to a dwelling to 40,000 square feet, and I'm working with the Planning Board and Board of Selectmen to update these bylaws because clearly they're out of date and inappropriate. I understand that's not an issue for the Board of Health, but my primary concerns with this entire document is that I don't personally have a way to provide you input on a regular basis. I'm not sure who came up with this and how it needs to change. Obviously, we're open discussion now. That is great. But if you could let me know how we can be a better part of this working document, appreciate it.
That's what this evening's for, Adam. It's for us to gather the opinions of the residents relative to these draft regulations so that we can take them into consideration when we finalize them.
Okay.
So I appreciate the input.
Yes, I would just like you to just reiterate one more time to keep in mind the scope of what this document is trying to do. And obviously it's trying to keep a healthy environment for animals, pets, residents of our town. But we really need to go back and look at these item by item and determine whether each bullet point provided here is a matter of health.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi there, good evening. My name is Sue Schmitz, and I'm a resident of 6 Housatonic Ave. So I guess I'll just kind of go case by case around the points in the current draft regulations that I find to be in need of further work. So starting on 201-3, point D, furnished with the application written notification of all abutters. That seemed to be overly invasive and involved in my mind. I can't think of other kind of household pets or other pets that people might have on their property where that process is required. So I think there are other ways that we could revise that specific part of the document. And in that section as well, letter G, animals needing a certificate of health provided by the company or person selling the animals. That's not something that chickens often have unless they've had a sort of a history with a veterinarian. So that's something that would probably be pretty prohibitive to be able to provide. And then another point that I had some feedback around was section 2.01-42, the paragraph 2, management and disposal of manure and soil bedding. Again, like others have raised, I think we need to have more of a collaborative process as to how we're coming up with these regulations, as I don't believe that current chicken owners or members of the agricultural committee have been consulted when reviewing this, so some of this might not actually be beneficial to chickens or the environment. So that paragraph 2 is another area that we'd want to do some further review on. And let's see. In addition to that, I think it was mentioned earlier, section 201-52, number 7, the weekly cleaning of hen houses being required. That is definitely an excessive number. After research, I'm sure people would find out that that's not necessary and is actually counterproductive for the chicken's health. But there are other measures that chicken owners take to ensure that there's proper kind of absorption of liquid materials and that the manure is properly composted and taken care of. So there, definitely would be helpful to have some overview of that process, but the frequency of what is suggested is not actually in alignment with what is common practice. And then as mentioned as well before, in that same section, number 15, that the pen should not be located less than 50 feet from any abutting property. That's extremely prohibitive for the majority of current chicken owners. So a more reasonable amount would be 25 feet. And that is actually even 25 feet is still more restrictive than what most communities have currently. A lot of suburban and rural communities, they don't have even 25 feet as a distance from abutting property. So 50 feet is very prohibitive. Basically, your coop would need to be on top of your house. So that won't quite work. So again, looking for further research and review of all of this. But I think all of the points that I've outlined were pretty clearly elaborated on in the draft vision that Mike had referenced earlier. So I definitely encourage you to take a close look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Henry Parley, 135 Pine Hill Road. Just one thing, 201.4, item number 1, the waterproofing. We had a problem with this about 10 years ago, I believe. Chickens tend to scratch and dig at things. People were putting materials on walls and the chickens were eating them. The town spent some money trying to research what the chickens were eating. This is definitely off what the USDA recommends. The USDA does have a good website where they recommend the particular housing that you should be using.
Thank you.
If I may?
Yes, Mike.
The second shot. I want to comment on several pieces here. First of all, the comments on lot size. I don't believe it's necessarily true that you cannot reference some spatial dimensions. You certainly mentioned linear dimensions in the draft. I think a better scheme for controlling the number of chickens based on the size of the lot would be something on the order of 1,500 square feet per chicken up to some maximum. And I would suggest that that would give you your 6 chicken limit, or 2,000, whatever it turned out to be, would give you the lower limit that you had suggested on the smaller lots and would allow some room for expansion up above. In the draft that I submitted to you for consideration, I used 1,500 feet per animal up to, I think, 25. But that, I think, is an area well worth some additional consideration. On the weekly cleanings, I'll get a little more specific. There's a technique known as the deep litter method, which is currently what is used by a large number of chicken owners. And here's how it works. You take shavings, sawdust, some mix like that, some absorptive mix. You put it on the floor. The chickens walk over it, they use it. You go out there a week or two later, you scatter some more. And you keep doing this, and you can do this for 3, even 4 months. You get it through the winter this way. And then when you're done, you have a mat that's packed down slowly, that's composted somewhat. You shovel it up, throw it on the compost heap, and you're ready to go. Weekly cleanings does run counter to most generally accepted agricultural practice. And I'd be glad to give you examples of that. The mass agriculture people can give you that as well. They have it available and online. On the certificates, I have not seen certificates or had them offered to me when buying chicks. However, I recognize that Massachusetts, at least, has a statute requiring that such things exist. I suspect that if you wanted people who were buying chickens to get certificates, at least for ones they buy subsequent to the passage of some regulations, I think that would probably be doable. Certainly a commercial establishment like Agway, which sells chicks, would have access to that. The other place around here that often has chicks is Dodge Grain up in New Hampshire. I'm not familiar with the New Hampshire rules, but I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if certificates might be available. Not necessarily a bad thing. It's not currently done now, but I don't think people would find it difficult to deal with. On the lot line, I want to reiterate the concern that 50 feet is somewhat arbitrary. I think it's reasonable to have enough distance to your lot line that things don't spill over into your neighbor's yard, and I think that's important. But is it 10 feet, is it 50 feet? 50 feet seems quite large. It's certainly, it's not the case in many of the towns around us. It may be in some. You'll notice if you've looked at what other towns have, there's an amazing variation from almost no chicken regulations in Andover to fairly tight ones in Tingsboro. I don't know what Billerica has. Carlisle has little, if any. They have some restrictions pertaining to manure piles that I think are probably designed for the horsey farms. Let's see. I would agree that for anything in here, some kind of review or exception process is probably in order. You will have situations where people might have what's technically a fairly small lot, but it could be backed up on land of no known or expected use. There are a lot of situations that might call for some variation here, and I think you're going to need an appeals process, both for that and for the situation in which people think that the rules might have been misinterpreted or misapplied. I think you owe it to people to have that. On the high water, I mean, our water's all coming out of wells. generally quite far away from anybody's house. I think that we could probably let the Conservation Commission and their rules control the proximity to chickens. And I think I would suggest that to you. That's it for the moment. Why don't I get down and maybe somebody else has got something to say.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Linda Bertulli. I live at 423 Acton Road in Chelmsford. And I've lived there 46 years. I've had chickens for more than 35 years. I have no abutters at all. My property runs right along 27. I have behind me, the bike path is there. My chicken coop is about 60 feet from our house. It's not near the bike path. We have a stockade fence to cover that anyway, so it's not accessible to anybody. I have a bachelor's degree in animal science from UMass. I took poultry science, and I take excellent care of my chickens. About 5 years ago, we built their chicken coop, and I put pine shavings in it. I clean it like less than a month, and we have a big pile where we compost down further. Also, my husband has a truck. We get sand because they have an outside pen, a big outside pen, and I put wire over the top because hawks will get them. And if it gets a little moist, which it really isn't that much because it's in the woods, we put sand down so it doesn't smell or anything. But I take immaculate care of them. So my point is, I don't know exactly what's going on if you're trying to limit people to get 6 chickens, but I don't even have an abutter, and there's no dwellings 50 feet near me or anything. So my point is, I think that you should be maybe flexible on this. I don't live in a development. I mean, I can see if somebody had a fence and there's somebody right there and all that, but I don't. And I've never had a complaint. The only complaint against me I ever had was about 10 years ago. I had gotten a rooster, and that can happen when you buy chicks because they vent sex them and sometimes they make a mistake. And so I had a rooster, and the person complained he was crowing during the day and not in the morning, which anyway, so I had a notice from the dog catcher, and the next day I got rid of him. So that's it, and it doesn't smell or anything. And the person that was talking about the compost thing in the wintertime, I don't really do that. If I can get to the manure pile, I do that, but it's supposed to help the chickens. It produces heat for them, the nitrogen, and it's supposed to be better to do that. And also, I called my grain store today, and it's Erickson's in Acton, and I asked if they sold just 6 chickens if you don't have a flock, because years ago you had to get a dozen, and she said we do, but we don't recommend that because they're a flock animal and they huddle together to stay warm in the wintertime. And my chicken coop is 10 by 10, so if I had 6 chickens, it would be kind of a lost, there wouldn't be very many of them, but that's all. I just hope that you'll be flexible about this, because I have, I've done this. I worked in a hospital in Boston running a heart-lung machine for open heart surgery. It's a long story how I ended up doing that, but I'm retired, and this is my hobby, and I just love animals, and chickens actually have personalities, and if you don't like animals, this probably doesn't interest you, but it's a good hobby, and it keeps me busy, keeps me active, and that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Bob Myers from 7 Pine Hill Avenue. Sorry. I just wanted to address what a prior speaker, actually 2 prior speakers, had mentioned that the 50-foot setback was too restrictive. I wanted to stand up and support the 50 feet because I think that's exactly what the current zoning is a 50-foot setback. So what they're proposing is a reduction in the setback. I would say that 50 feet is more than adequate. Also, It was brought up, the number of chickens per square footage was brought up where someone could have up to 30 based on their square footage, which I believe is about 6 times what the Board of Health is recommending, which was about 5 or 6 chickens. So I would like to say that we should not have a square footage exception that lets people have up to 30 chickens. I feel that's a very excessive amount for what is, in effect, suburban lots and suburban neighborhoods. We are not an agrarian section of town in the Westlands. Maybe other areas of town are, but the Westlands are very small lots and they are suburban in use. I also wanted to bring up the town stormwater runoff program when we're talking about setbacks from wetlands and setback from drinking water sources. I know the last town meeting appropriated about $2 million for stormwater runoff and how to address runoff pollution. Keeping of chickens, their waste product, the vermin that they attract is certainly bad for the stormwater runoff, and it's bad for our water quality. You know, we have wells in town. Everything follows gravity and runs downhill. So anything we allow into the stormwater runoff goes right into our drinking water. So I definitely support setbacks in that regard as well. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Good evening. Laura McLeod, 56 Winter Street.
Good to see Laura.
I just wanted to kind of touch base on some myths about chickens. So I just kind of wanted to do some bullet points tonight. Some of the main concerns with chickens are disease, noise, waste, odor, and predators or rodents. So myth number 1 is chickens carry disease communicable to humans. The truth is that small flocks literally have no risk of the avian flu. And the Center for Disease Control website actually has a statement that says there is no need at present to remove a flock of chickens because of concerns regarding the avian flu. Chickens are too noisy. Fact is that laying hens at their loudest have about the same decibel level as human conversation. There's been cases where hens are so quiet that neighbors don't even realize that their neighbors have chickens. So unless you have a pop-up rooster in there, noise shouldn't be an issue with chickens. As far as chickens causing predators or rodents, chickens are not a main contributor for rodents. Wild bird feeders, pet food, gardens, fish ponds, bird baths, and trash attract raccoons, flies, foxes. Chickens can actually be part of the solution. They are ferocious carnivores, and they will seek out anything pretty much that moves. Ticks, fleas, mosquitoes, and even baby mice, baby rats, and small snakes. What else? And then the only other thing is I was in touch with a woman who I found on the internet, and she worked very, very closely with the city of Somerville. And Somerville is actually one of the densest cities in the country. And she came up working with the town with the Somerville Urban Agricultural Ordinance, which I found very intriguing. And if you guys have a chance before the next meeting, if you might have a chance to look at that and just kind of see what she came up with. And she's also willing to, she said she'd be willing to talk with anybody for input or suggestions. She was really a great resource. And I just think the only other thing I'd like to say is that we as Chelmsford residents should have the right to teach our children where food comes from And having chickens is a wonderful way to kind of show them how to take care of them properly and actually let them see that, wow, our chickens lay eggs. Chickens are actually a community builder also. I know in my neighborhood, I have neighbors who come over with their grandchildren and neighbors who come over with their small children to visit my girls, and they bring them treats, and it just makes that tie with your neighborhood much stronger. And you know, the little kids smile and giggle and off they go, and it's nice to know that people are still interested in that. And we take care of our chickens. We have a coop. We do what we're supposed to. We keep their feed in galvanized garbage cans with lids, just like we feed the birds in the wintertime. We've had chickens for 14 to 15 years in Chelmsford, and we've never had a complaint and never had a problem with rodents of any sort. And we have wetlands behind us, and we are in you know, within the zoning and the wetlands. So I just urge you to know that, you know, these aren't just chickens. You know, they're part of our families, just like our dogs and our cats. And the last note is that chickens actually produce less solid waste than a 40-pound dog. I mean, I won't get into the statistics, but you know, and they're kept in their coop and in their run. You know, they're not going around doing their business all around town. I mean, it's contained. It's, you know, and if you do the deep litter method in your coop, there is no runoff. There is no urine, if a chicken even has urine. It's not going off into the wetlands that is just beautiful behind our house. I mean, we also take care of conservation, and we care about conservation. So I just ask you to please work with us and hear us and know that chickens are of value to Chelmsford.
Thank you.
you.
Good evening, Phil Stanway, 6 Lanson Lane, Chelmsford, Mass. Many of my neighbors have chickens, and I know a lot of people around town who have chickens. And in all the years I've been in town and around, I've never seen a problem with them. Most, or actually all of the people I know, maintain immaculate coops. The chickens are clean. I've never seen a vermin. I've seen more woodchucks in town than I've ever seen rats in town. And so I would like to say that, unfortunately, one of my neighbors who had chickens for a very, very long time removed her chickens recently because she was afraid. She was afraid of what would happen. She was afraid that she'd be fined. And that was very chilling to hear that. And I wasn't very happy about that. So I do ask that you do take this very seriously. And the other question I would like to say is that I know some people who have large chicken coops, and if they have a possibility to repurpose it, you shouldn't have to remove it. Because once you remove chickens from a chicken coop, it's a shed. If you talk to conservation, they set the 50-foot limit for a chicken coop because they consider it a shed. And I think the town should, this board should consider it the same way. Once a building is clean and empty and there's no chickens in it, it's no longer a coop. It could be, as long as it meets the zoning requirements of a shed or an outbuilding, it should be able to be repurposed out without being destroyed. Especially this time of year. To remove a large structure at this time of year is not possible. I work with an open space program, and we've shut down for the entire year because we can't pour concrete, we can't pull things out of the ground. The cost and expense would be astronomical. We can't repurpose anything. So by having anything removed in the off-season is expensive, and I think an undue hardship to our residents. So I would say that if you do move ahead and you do ban these structures, that you allow residents to repurpose them and to save some of their investment. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil.
Hi there, Alex Melville from 6 Monmouth Street in Chelmsford. Thanks for hearing us tonight. So I'm one of the chicken owners who has too small of a lot size. I've had chickens for 3 years with the full support of everyone on my street. In fact, they watch them for me when I'm on vacation, so it's really nice. It's a great community, a subset of our great community. Anyway, on to the regulations. I do have a few recommendations as well, as many of us have spoken already. Speaking to specific points, I was wondering where the decision to include neighbors' opinions on having chickens comes into play, since I don't think that's a requirement for any other permit we have, but I'm not that knowledgeable about it. So anyway, I don't think that needs to be there at all. Secondly, the number of chickens per lot size, I think that shouldn't be based on the lot per se, but on the coop. If we don't want our chickens running around our whole lot, it makes sense that we should base how many we have on a coop. And on another note related to that, the number of chickens per coop should be much higher than 6 per coop, regardless of size. For example, if you have a chicken and some regular farm, you might have 1 chicken per square foot. And as many others have said, these are flock animals, you should have a few. And I think the recommendation is 1.5 square feet to 3 square feet of coop size, and then maybe 4 to 6 square feet of run size per chicken. So I think 6 is a very low number. I have 9 right now. And I don't know what the limit should be, 20, 40, I don't know. At some point, it's a lot, right? But it shouldn't be 6. Let's see here. 50 feet from residence lines, I agree that that's too strict. If we are going to reduce the size of the lot from an acre, then consider that a quarter-acre lot is 100 square feet on a side, 100 feet on a side. And so therefore, 50 feet apart from both sides means you have to have the coop instead of your house. So I really appreciate you guys are willing to reduce the lot size requirement, but consider that it's not actually a reduction in lot size if you keep the 50 feet. Let's see here. Deep litter, I think, was mentioned. That's how I operate my coop. It's not the only way. Some coops do require daily or weekly cleaning. I'm not that familiar with those methods. But I do the deep litter where I sprinkle some shavings over everything once a week. And it's great insulation in the winter and prevents disease from chicks and chickens. And I think that's what they recommend using, as others have said, both here in the US and also across the world. I don't remember what this point was for, but we like having our eggs, our chickens, because in my case, I eat the eggs and I like having healthy eggs. So I am very motivated to keep them in a clean environment, and I'm fully on board with whatever health requirements are needed to make that happen. But I think that a big part of why we want chickens for some of us is for the healthy eggs, the pet ownership, the responsibility for our children. I'm not letting my children, 6, 4, and 1, walking around the chicken coop. I don't even let them touch the birds. Maybe I'm a little bit overzealous in how much I protect them from the chickens, but you know, I want to keep my chickens clean, and I want to keep my children safe. So we're all in that together, I'm pretty sure. Okay, zoning bylaws. I think when a coop is a coop, it's not a shed, and when it's a shed, it's not a coop. So I think there was some talk at some point about making the zoning bylaws not applicable to coops. I'm not sure how that works between the different departments, but I know that's where I got busted. I went to the Board of Health asking for a permit, and you know, I submitted my lot plan and everything, and I got approval, I got the permit, in full knowledge of the small lot size, by the way. So I got my permit, and I was shocked when these permit violations came out. And you know, I felt like a criminal being served when I got my certified mail. So I didn't appreciate that, but I'm all for the better clarity between departments, and I'd like to see that moving forward. Okay, and then the last few things I want to mention is just with regards to comments I heard since I've gotten here. Certificates, I called the Agway where I got my chickens. They say that they do get certificates from wherever they get the chickens from, and so that's not a hardship at all. Chickens per lot size, yeah, I said that one already. And yeah, so also ticks, that's another reason I got the chickens. You know, oh yeah, right. I am not in a developed neighborhood. I have one neighbor on my right and one neighbor in front of me, and then behind me and to the other side are not residentially used. So in whatever language we move forward with, I'd really appreciate making sure that whatever restriction in lot distances take into account that these are really protections to keep people from having coops right up next to someone else's yard. But it should not be applicable in the case where I'm next to an unused lot or parking lot or something like that. So anyway, thank you again for your time to hear us out, and may the best decisions prevail on all sides. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Laurie Myers, 7 Pine Hill Avenue. So I just want to thank this board's work on these regulations. I think they strike a good balance in respecting neighbors with the setbacks. I think it allows more chickens into town in a more controlled way. And I think that we need to be mindful that, you know, we want to introduce more chickens into town, but we also want to respect that not all neighbors in Chelmsford want chickens. So just thank you for that.
Thank you.
Melinda Goodick, 225 Acton Road. A couple things I'd like to point out. Regarding the certificate of health provided by the company selling the animals, a lot of times they're not selling animals, they're selling eggs. You can get fertilized eggs through the mail. And maybe there's a certificate, but that's a certificate for the eggs. And when you get the eggs, you don't have any guarantee about what the gender of the bird is inside. They can be disposed of otherwise, but for a little while anyway, well, they don't make a lot of noise until they get to a certain age. So that I just wanted to point out, a lot of schools, a lot of science programs have incubation programs to show children how chickens happen. I don't think that should be stopped, but I think it's worth saying they probably don't have certificates either for health. And I'd like the board, with all respect, to take into account the motivation that people have for having their own chickens. In my case, I do it for local food, to be closer to my food source, a little bit lower on the food chain, and to save money. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else before Mike gets up again?
Hi, good evening. My name is Mary Ellen Morris. I live at 7 Amble Road. And I've been in Chelmsford for 31 years, 21 at our current location. I've never been to any kind of town meeting before, so this is all new to me. But I really felt compelled to come, even though we don't own chickens. We will probably never own chickens, although our property complies easily with, you know, even all of these regulations. But I just wanted to say that I feel like we're trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. I don't understand, I can't comprehend why this has come about. Many of our neighbors have chickens or have had chickens over the years. There's never been a single issue or problem. We love them. They've always been clean and well cared for. The kids love them. We love eating fresh food and eggs. We trade different things. We give them vegetables, they give us eggs. It's wonderful. We ride the bike trail almost every single day, and I have ridden by this woman's beautiful coops, and never once has there been an odor, an issue, a problem. All I can remember from when this started is it started over a rat on somebody's property. I don't know much detail about that, but I can tell you, having lived in Chelmsford for 31 years, there have been rodents, rats, and other things here since long before any of us lived here on any of the properties. I have 3 cats, and they bring things back to me every day, and they have done that for many, many, many years. long before anyone in our neighborhood had chickens. So I think the rats are there regardless of chickens. All I want to say is that some of these rules, again, I don't know what problem we're trying to solve, but they seem very draconian to me, and it seems like it would put cost into what is a hobby, what is a way for us to grow our own food and to be able to be closer to, as someone said, closer to that food source. It would put prohibitive costs there so that many people who are currently doing it or would like to do it couldn't afford to do it. So I don't think that some of those costs would be a good idea. So I'm just here as a resident who just says, I'm okay with the chickens. I just don't even know why we need to do this. So if there is some need, I just hope it's done sensibly and so that we can still have chickens here and just have fun with it and have nice fresh eggs. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Nancy Arroway, 65 Littleton Road. I have had the pleasure of reading a draft that's been circulated, and I do have some concerns about it, and I'd like to voice my concerns tonight. The biggest concern I have is the draft that I've seen places the Board of Health in a position of arbitrating and enforcing regulations that are under the purview of other boards and committees. It puts you in conflict with those committees. It puts your role in conflict with those committees. And it places an enormous burden for staffing on the Board of Health. Places that I've seen that is wetlands, incurring regulations under the Board of Health that deal with wetlands. That's Concom's job, and they enforce it. Placing regulations under the Board of Health that are zoning, that's under the purview of the Planning Board, the ZBA, and the building inspector. So if you take that on, you're now not only in conflict with them, but taking on their jobs. Protection of wells belongs to somebody else. And we've got regs on noise control. And for the life of me, I can't imagine why you would need to ban roosters as opposed to addressing it under noise control, because it's not just roosters for animals that make noise, but there's this desire to say, okay, we're going to get rid of the roosters and we won't have to worry about noise. Well, that's not true. There's all sorts of other animals that are noise sources. But you know what? None of them come anywhere near the levels of noise that are permitted in neighborhoods, in residential neighborhoods, under our noise control regulations. I urge you to step back and look at health regulations that address animal food control, animal waste control, and outflow, because those are the health concerns that we're working on here that we really need to address. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ed Buckley, 27 Buckman Drive. I've only got one thing to add. The town of Billerica setbacks are 100 feet. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you.
Doug Hauser, 10 North Road. I want a follow-up. I was thinking about some of the comments that I've heard, and if you do decide to implement or adopt provisions that allow for review or an appeal process before your board, I'd ask that you consider, with the advice of town council, that you use a special permit criteria versus a variance criteria. From the legal perspective, upholding a variance is next to impossible, as I'm sure town council can confirm with each of you, and some don't even need that. I think a special permit is the appropriate type of review that you're talking about based on the comments I've been hearing, and that allows you to use your discretion to address certain particular concerns, a lot of which are within these regulations, but I think it keeps a level playing field and not empowers any one abutter or any one person from having control over a neighbor simply because of a legal standard. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi there, me again. The Cluck organization, which is lobbying on the chickens, recently looked into the Billerica rules, and we thought the setback was recently changed a few years ago to 7.5 feet. This was, I don't know, 2015, according to the internet. So I don't know if it's been changed since. And they can have a maximum of 12 hens, an increase from the previous maximum of 6. And they have restrictions on coop size, where the number of birds must comply with 1 chicken per 2 square feet per hen. As I was saying earlier, that's more in line with the national recommendations. And there were a few other changes that I won't get into, but I just felt that I had to correct what I thought was a mistake from a previous resident. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
As you can imagine, I've been sitting back here making notes, and I want to address a couple of particular points. First, on the rodents, the single most important clause in these draft regulations is the one about keeping the food in a rodent-proof container. And that doesn't mean plastic, because I'll eat through plastic. It means a galvanized trash bucket with a top. That's probably the single most effective way to control rodents. Believe me, if the chickens catch a rodent, they'll make a mess out of them. I found a picture of a rat wandering into a chicken yard on the internet, and the rat did not come out very well. I'd also note that it's been unfortunate this year that we have had a rodent problem. I'd also note that we've had a rather unusual year. It's not just rats. Have you noticed the number of squirrels? Have you noticed the number of rabbits? Have you noticed the number of chipmunks? It's been quite a year, and I think that problem is related as much as anything to the fact that it was just a fairly lush year. There was rain at various points all the way through the summer, and the critters went wild. I don't like it either, but that's nature, and all of these creatures are, in fact, indigenous. A little bit of chicken biology or physiology. No, there's no such thing as chicken urine. It's all kind of one thing. It's a little bit gooey, but it's not liquid by any means. And that's actually the beauty of the deep litter method, because it absorbs what liquid there is. The rest remains in there. And it doesn't smell, or at least it doesn't smell inordinately, and if you keep it in the chicken coop, nobody will ever smell it outside. And it does a very good job, but again, you might shovel it out every 3 months. That's, I think, the last time I did it. It was on a 3-month round, and there was no problem either in the chicken coop or when I put it in the compost heap, which is probably the best place for putting this. You mix chicken manure with leaves, with grass. The chicken manure provides the nitrogen. The grass and the leaves provide the bulk, and I've got some of the best vegetables in town. On noise, and on roosters in general, one of the sad truths about chickens is it's very, very hard to tell the sex of a chick. And there are some interesting stories that I could tell to the attorney on there about tax cases involving chickens and whether they could be sexed. But the fact of the matter is, even if you buy what are supposed to be only hens as chicks, they won't guarantee much more than 90%. So you're going to get a rooster once in a while, and you send them down to you can get rid of them. You send them to the local Chinese restaurant or something when they grow up. On Somerville does allow chickens. It's fairly restrictive. On the other hand, they have a population density of about 18,000 per square mile. We've got a population density of about 1,500, so they have 10 times the population density of Chelmsford, and yet they manage to have chickens. And if they can certainly do it there, I'm sure that we can do it here with somewhat reduced degree of regulation. Anything else? Yeah, a general comment on the nature of the town of Chelmsford. We have a right to farm law. Now, the right to farm law does not cover individuals. It turns out it covers farms and farming operations. That said, I think it represents the fact that many people in town look back to Chelmsford's agrarian past and treasure that as some piece of the town that they live in today. We're not a farm community anymore, although we have a couple of farms. But I think the people of Chelmsford have chosen to encourage, farming and self-sufficiency types of activities, gardening, chickens, and so forth. And I think we should try very hard to be consistent with that. And finally, obviously, I've spent a lot of time looking at your proposed regulations and making my suggestions. I am more than happy to continue to contribute to that. Tap me if you want me to either give comments or make suggestions or even do drafting for you. I would be more than happy to do it. And I think there are several other people here who would be happy to help on that as well.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something else about farming in our community. We are a right to farm community, and as Mike said, that addresses the ability to have commercial agriculture in anywhere in town. But that doesn't tell the whole story. Our master plan, in its very premise, encourages agriculture throughout the community. Our zoning bylaws, first paragraph, the intent of the bylaws is to preserve our agricultural heritage and our ability to farm and agriculture in the community. Our historical and cultural preservation plan addresses preserving the right to maintain our agricultural heritage. This is throughout town. This is individuals. I grew up on a 1-acre farm. On 1 acre, we raised almost all of our own food. In a community that encourages agriculture, I'm the last person that would encourage anyone not to produce their food. And that's part of what we're talking about here. Folks don't just have chickens to pet them, for the little kids to carry around. These folks have chickens because they produce part of their food. Before I sit down, there's one other thing I need to say, and it's kind of flippant, but this whole thing about roosters, if you're raising birds on a small scale, It's real easy to keep roosters from crowing. You just put a collar on them, and they can't. And that's the reason I come to you and say, don't ban roosters. Address noise, and address noise in the context of all the other noise sources and the permitting of noise in town. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Myers, 7 Pine Hill Avenue. A prior speaker alluded to population density in Chelmsford at 1,500 people per square mile. The population density varies greatly depending on where in town you are. I happen to live in the Westlands, very small lots close together. So where these setbacks I think are appropriate in some of the larger lots in town, we do need reasonable setbacks in the Westlands area. Chelmsford is not, or is no longer, an agricultural community and hasn't been in about 50 years or more. It's unfortunate. I have nothing against animals. Wouldn't mind owning a horse, but can't bear the cost and I don't have the square footage. And that's, you know, what you have to expect when you're an adult. You know, you have to make reasonable accommodations based on where you live, who your neighbors are, what your lot size is. You know, we're all in this community together. A point about roosters. Years ago, I lived in another community, and there was a house about maybe, I don't know, 6 or 7 houses down that had a rooster, and my God, that thing was loud. So I don't see how anyone can complain and say that roosters don't make noise. That has not been my experience. I don't know about putting a collar on them. I don't know how humane that is or if it works, but I just know my experience with roosters is extremely noisy. Also, a prior speaker had spoken about the amount of squirrels and chipmunks that are around this year. We had a problem with rats in our neighborhood. I was able to put traps out and catch rats. I was not catching squirrels and I was not catching chipmunks. These were rats. So it's a serious problem. And again, we need reasonable setbacks and zoning laws to address this problem. Thank you very much.
Ed Buckley, 27 Buckman Drive. People in town, some people say, well, rats aren't caused by chickens. Chickens don't cause the rats. Well, we had a negligent chicken owner. And if you have 10 chicken owners in town and 7 are immaculate and you have 3 bad ones, God help you if you live next to a negligent chicken owner. I caught 53 rats myself. When they, Mr. Shanahan had the chickens removed, the catching rats fell right off the chart. So there is a correlation between the wetlands. There's water rats that are there. They dump the waste, which the rats eat the waste and the grain. Gave them an ample supply to reproduce of food. And we suffered the consequences. Dalton Road, right even across Stedman, we were loaded with rats. 27 years, never saw a rat. I'm not going to say the rats weren't there. I'm sure they were. They're water rats. But you get a negligent chicken owner, and they dump on the wetlands, you'll go through hell like we did as a neighborhood. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you.
I'd like to comment on the previous speaker's comments.
Right, I'm going to allow this, but this is going to be the end of the challenging of prior speakers for what they say. And as long as what you're going to say has not been said before.
I don't believe it has. So I wholeheartedly agree with the prior speaker that waste control, food control, and control of runoff is absolutely important for the health of our community and for rat control. But I encourage the board to address those items because those are the items that affect our health. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that has anything new that they want to add, something that hasn't been discussed yet?
Pam Pelletier, 40 Meadowbrook Road. I don't think this has been discussed, but having to get permission from my neighbor. What if I have a neighbor that doesn't like me? I've already had issues with the Board of Health because my neighbor just doesn't like me. My leaves blow the wrong way. Why are they going to allow me to have a pet that they don't like? So I think that's something that needs to be reconsidered. Bless you.
Thank you.
If we have to get rid of the chickens, do I now have to tear down my barn because they're talking about getting rid of coops, because now that is bringing in the building commissioner for demolition? I'm not going to have to get all that money to pull that together. And if we're banned from having chickens, is Agway going to be banned from selling them? Like, if we are not allowed as Chelmsford residents to own an animal, why are they able to sell them? That's something that really needs to be thought about. And if everyone's so concerned about the chickens' fertilizer, what about all the geese up at the school grounds that our children are playing in? Because chicken poop, when it rains, it dissolves. It goes away. It's not there anymore. Geese poop, it's there. It's there for weeks. If you hit it with a hose, it's still there. And our kids are playing on it. They're out at recess. They're playing sports on it. For weeks, they're rolling around in it. Nobody's worried about that. And are all these people that have the wild turkeys on their front lawn, are we going to open turkey season to cut down the number of turkeys that are pooping all over town? Is that going to be looked into? Because I'm forever sitting in traffic waiting for the turkeys, because I'm not going to get out and shoo them out of the road, because those things are vicious. And I own chickens, one, because they're very calming and soothing. My children play with them. And the eggs you buy in the store are months old. They have been sitting in a warehouse. They have been on a truck. They have been away from the chicken for months. Look into it. When you have an egg out of a chicken from the coop, it is different than the eggs you just bought at Market Basket. They are so much better and healthier for you. And I have had chickens since I moved into town, and we've never had a rodent problem. One other thing I'd like to say is, on this whole dead animal bury issue, I'm not sure how the rats were disposed of, but getting rid of disposed animals, I know for a fact that the highway department in Chelmsford doesn't properly dispose of dead animals, because when the deers are getting hit on the highway, they're chucking them over the fence into my yard, because I've had them explode. And my children have come running in the house saying, "Mommy, there's worms everywhere," and I've had maggots all over my yard. So if I have to dispose of a dead chicken properly, the town needs to dispose of animals properly. Thank you.
Hi, Mike McLean, 110 Graniteville Road. Thank you for letting me speak. We've been chicken owners for probably a little over 3 years now, and it's an integral part of my wife's daycare. She uses it to teach the kids, from raising of the eggs to hatching of the eggs to feeding the chickens and seeing them grow, the whole process. If we were to lose the square footage, we're under the 40,000 square feet. For me, it would be considered a hardship, because it does relate to income for my wife. It is a draw to her daycare. In any kind of business, you need to have an edge on the competitors. And having this chicken coop and the chickens is a draw to her business. So for us, that would be a hardship. I mean, that's loss of income. And it's not just a hardship for us. I mean, we support local business. Agway is where I get my food supplies. Across the board, it's a good thing. And I really feel bad for the people who were affected by the rat issue. That to me seems like it was something that had to be dealt with on an individual basis, and it wasn't taken care of properly. So now we're all paying the price for that. I went about my permit the right way. I have a permit for my chickens. I've gotten a permit for the past 3 years. And I know there's people who haven't obtained permits and they just have chickens, and you know, if they're not going to get a permit, then they're probably not going to clean up well either. It just goes across the board for the kind of mentality you're dealing with. But there are, I mean, there's great speakers. Everybody here is here tonight because they are good with the animals and they're good neighbors and they want to clean up after themselves and they want to deliver to the community. So I don't see too many people here tonight that don't have a permit and are here to argue about chickens. So we are dealing with an individual case basis, and I would like something in the draft that deals with hardship and what committee would handle the hardship and how to go about applying for that if they do add the 40,000 square feet law into the draft. Again, I feel bad for the situation, but there are a lot of good people here, and the chickens are a good thing. For me to have to tell, or my wife to have to tell the daycare and their parents, you know, the next day, oh, well, what happened to the chickens? Well, we had to get rid of the chickens, and try explaining that to little kids. And there's some people say they don't let them, we don't let the daycare kids near the chickens, but my own kids deal with the chickens all the time. You know, it teaches them work ethic and, you know, how to take care of animals. It just goes on down the line. And although Chelmsford isn't officially a farming community, we do retain some of that heritage and want to pass that along to our kids who desperately need it. They're on the internet all the time. They're on the computers. And you know how it is to get a kid to be outside with animals and in nature and learning the process and eating fresh eggs is 10 times better than any program that Chelmsford could have for these chickens. So I really think that you should put that into consideration when you make the draft. Thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, then we will call this public input section to a conclusion. Thank you very much. We do appreciate all the comments. We've been taking notes here. There's been some common themes through a lot of it, and we'll be looking at it as we review the regs for our meeting next week, which is when we will adopt the new regs. The plan is to have the regs in place by the end of the year so that permits can continue to be issued under the new regs. Returning to our agenda. The hearing. Mr. Hausler, are you ready? Yeah.
Doug, if you'd mind waiting a moment for the room to clear, for anyone who wants to leave.
Doug, I'd just like to make a quick introduction. All right. So, Stephen Augustino of 6 Pine Hill Road, this is your client. All right. And by his attorney, Doug Housley, he's requested a hearing to address the revocation of his domestic animal permit and requested domestic animal permit with any special conditions attached thereto relating to backyard animals maintained at that property. This hearing is not to discuss the modification of existing regulations. We're going into a public hearing that's going to address Doug's attorney Housley's client's situation. So any discussion, please limit it to Mr. Augustino's domestic animal permit. Augustine is, yeah. Okay, Doug?
Thank you. And for your record, Douglas Hausler, Lampert, Hausler, and Rodman, 10 North Road, representing the applicants who are before you tonight. I can't help but notice the comments that I just heard and witnessed and the input and how much I learned here in the last hour. And what I'm hearing is there's much to be learned by what we just listened to. The bylaws that exist are clearly inadequate, and that is a problem. There are a lot of bylaws that Chelmsford has that are just not enforced, that are far greater than what we're dealing with, as I'm aware of, one person who's made a complaint about my clients' maintenance of their chickens. If there are bylaws in town that are just not enforced, and I'll give you an example, and this is where you need to have some reasonable discretion. An example in our town is sign bylaws, where we have what we call A-frame signs put up primarily by the schools, and they're throughout the town, dozens of times a year, and at least 100 times. But the town doesn't enforce it. But there's a bylaw directly addressing that issue. And that's just an example. In this particular application, my clients did not have the proper permit for what they have maintained. They are willing to comply. They have identified that once your process is completed with this review, it sounds like they will be able to comply with any proffered regulations you come out with. So what we're talking about, what we're looking for, is temporary relief that will be permitted from now until such time as your final bylaws are in fact determined, because it could very, very well be, based on the input you've heard tonight, that what they have in existence is going to comply with what you will be proffering as new regulations. And that's what we're focusing on. They're in violation today because they weren't aware of the requirements. They made a mistake. Our community is not punitive. And to quote, I found it a little ironic that the person who's made no less than 70 email requests to your board and town officials about this is one couple across the street from my clients. Yet we have, and I can produce to you, several neighbors have signed who are direct abutters to my client, who have had no issue whatsoever with the way they've maintained their chickens and rabbits and the way they've maintained their property, that they have encountered no such thing as rodents or any other problems. So what I find a little interesting here is we're in a hearing which is going to potentially have a very negative effect on my clients. And one of the clients has already provided to you some a licensed social worker's report about the fact that it's a supportive animal. So there's an element of compassion here that I think needs to be focused or attended to. We don't knee-jerk simply because one person believes what's been stated as fact is certainly not fact. One person across the street has said that they encountered rodent problems. Now, it's odd that the people next door to my clients haven't had any such issues. It's hard to believe that in the years that my clients have maintained these animals, there were no problems for 5.5, 6 years prior thereto. But suddenly, with the weather conditions that Mr. Raisback mentioned earlier, apparently there were some rodent problems in the town of Chelmsford. There's no question there were. But I don't believe it bears any relevance, and there is no proof before your board to demonstrate that my clients' maintenance of their chickens or rabbits are the direct and proximate cause of one neighbor across the street who experienced, allegedly, problems with rats. I think that your board needs to use its discretion. I hope it uses it justly and fairly, that it understands that its own regulations right now are, at best, flawed, probably unenforceable because of their flaws, But rather than becoming combative, let's see what your end result is. It's a reasonable approach. If we can comply with your proposed bylaws that you've discussed tonight, that it seem to be going towards a recommended path, we may have no issues whatsoever. So I just ask that you consider that. Be happy to answer any questions that your board has, and I appreciate your time, both for the prior session and tonight. Thank you.
So Doug, if you will. So your client was issued a domestic animal permit in error because, well, he met our regulations, he did not meet the zoning regulations.
It was an error.
Okay?
Sure.
Now, it was revoked because he violated the permit. He had a permit for, at best, 5 to 9 chickens. He had 14 chickens plus a menagerie of other small animals.
4 rabbits.
And ducks.
There are no ducks, is that correct? Ducks were gone.
Okay. So, while there may be some neighborhood problem about the rodents, that is not why his permit was revoked. And he wasn't given the courtesy of extending until the end of the year where we did new regs because he violated the permit. So I want to be clear that the rodents were not part of any decision that was made here.
Right. And the same response to that is the alleged violations have occurred now for numbers of years, and I'm going to presume my client is the only one that has probably been in violation of these regulations that have not been uniformly enforced by agreement. And all I'm asking for is this board to use common sense and decency. And yes, you can point to there's a regulation and he's not in compliance. That's great. That's really terrific if you want to be so strict and take out a human element here. And that's what we're talking about, using your discretion as to what is appropriate when we are in a state of flux. By definition, what you just went through. We just spent an hour talking about problems with the bylaw. I'm asking you to just be like everything else in town. Sometimes we don't enforce everything every single way, every single moment. And I'm asking you not to turn a blind eye, but to take the time between now and when you make those regulations and leave it in abeyance. Once you've made a determination of what the applicable bylaws are, my client will have to comply. It will have to apply before your board. It will have to meet those bylaws. And presumably, from what I'm hearing tonight, it sounds like it's going to be able to do so. So I'm asking you to use that equitable judgment. It's not black and white, it's gray.
And you yourself stated earlier this morning, or earlier during this evening, that our new regs had no room for latitude. We had no variance in them. We have no special permit. And that was stated a couple of times. And the truth is that we don't have any variance powers under the existing regs. We don't have any appeal power under the existing regs.
Exactly the point.
And we do enforce our regulations.
That's not true.
Well, if we are not.
The fact is they've had them for 4 or 5+ years and you haven't enforced it once.
Our regulations were enforced, Doug.
Actually,
they are in compliance with our regulations. They were not in compliance with zoning. We did not believe it was our obligation to enforce zoning. We have since
that was
been
what
told
you
otherwise.
believe. I understand. We can have this semantic back and forth for the next 5 minutes or whatever I'm limited to in time. It doesn't address the issue that I've raised. And you can have all your regulations, Anne-Marie, and you can sit there and say, well, it's black and white. It isn't. The bylaws, like many other bylaws in the town of Chelmsford, have not been forced equally. They've not been monitored equally. They have not been followed. And I'm asking you, while you're in the process of correcting them, to recognize that, admit that there have been a problem, and allow my clients to comply, but don't punish them when something could be resolved within a month or 2. It's absurd. It's mean. That's not the role of government, to be mean. It's there to assist and to get compliance. And what's shocking is that there are neighbors, and I'm happy to listen to anybody else that lives on their street, not a single person but one who has a bad history with my clients, a personal history, has complained. One person is going to make you guys be the enforcers. They're trying to make you do their dirty work to encourage them to be mean towards somebody that they just don't like. And they're using your board. And I'm saying, step away, please. Use your discretion. Allow this process to work fairly. And let's see what happens a month from now or 2 months from now when you have your regulations finalized. And if we meet them, we do. And if we can't meet them, my clients will have to make accommodations that are in compliance with your bylaws. But I'm asking you now to hold off on the enforcement for a brief period of time. And I'm not going to try to debate that with you any further.
I'm not going to debate it any further with you.
Thank you.
Is anyone that would like to speak to Mr. House's presentation?
Ed Buckley, 27 Buckman Drive. The last I checked, bylaws are quite important. Without the bylaws, and if they're not enforced, there's a lot of problems. So we're a nation of laws. We have a community of bylaws. They're important to be adhered to. I think the Board of Health is the proper board to handle this issue, and they're the board that needs to handle this issue. And that's all I have to say.
Gentlemen, do you have any questions?
So it's our intent to vote on the regulations next Monday, correct?
Right.
Nancy, do you have anything to say?
I do. I'd just like to point out that the lot size is a zoning regulation, not a Board of Health regulation. And it is not the Board of Health's job to enforce a zoning regulation, nor is it expectable that any licensing done by the Board of Health would incorporate any requirements other than Board of Health regulations. Therefore, it's perfectly reasonable that the Board of Health has indeed issued permits for small animals and large animals that are not based on lot size, because it's just not their job. Thank you.
Dr. Meikle? Any questions? No. No? So the Augustino's permit was revoked for cause. He was given an immediate order to remove his chickens and small animals. It's been extended from October 12th through to today. By maintaining the 14 chickens with unpermitted rabbits and ducks, although we're now told the ducks weren't there, he's in violation of the permit. Even if we put zoning aside, he's in violation of the permit that he was issued. So unless there's, Doug, do you have something else you want to say?
No, are you reading a prepared text already, or did you listen to anything that people have said here tonight?
No, Doug, I've made notes because I have had time to think about this, okay? We do enforce our regulations, Doug, all right? Now, you may not think we do.
Historically, that's not accurate, but let's go ahead.
It is my opinion that we do. We do not arbitrarily enforce regulations on the Board of Health. You may be able to find instances, perhaps, but it's not something that we routinely do. We don't have a variance power under our regulations.
So you're saying you are without absolute any discretion whatsoever to hold off for the minimum week or 2 weeks that might it take?
That is my opinion.
And you think that's good government in your opinion as well?
It is my opinion that we do not have the rights under our regulations to issue a variance. Now, I am hopeful that our new regulations will allow them to get their permit back and that they can place their animals somewhere temporarily. But I'm going to, it is going to be my vote to enforce this regulation because we have done it to other people in town. It would be treating them separately for me to give them an accommodation. As much as you're persuasive in your argument, but there are many people who are in the same situation, have gotten rid of their animals. They couldn't afford a lawyer, they didn't know to get a lawyer. So I'll entertain a vote here, unless either of you would like to say something else. So I'll entertain a motion, and I am reading this stuff, okay? That the revocation of the domestic animal permit issued to Mr. Augustino at 6 Pine Hill Road stand, that all chickens and other unpermitted small animals and accessories must be removed from the property by December 7th, although I'll correct that. I think accessories would include the coop. I think they should be able to keep that, pending the situation that we're looking at here. I have a December 7th, 2018 date that I'm suggesting, a fee of $25 to be assessed each day after a chicken or other small animals remains at the property beyond December 7th, 2018.
Point of order. Would you consider that even if you take a vote tonight, that you give my clients 30 days so that we can appeal if we so decide to the Superior Court, and that there be a stay pending our right to appeal?
I will entertain that if they will pay the fines in escrow.
I can't recommend that to them. They have a right to an appeal. You're saying you don't have a right of an appeal.
You can take an appeal, Doug, but we don't have the right to give them a variance. That's my interpretation of our rules and regulations. Now, can you let us continue with our voting?
Can I suggest perhaps an alternative approach here? This is, I think, an appeal of a revocation of a permit. I'm sorry, Paul Haverty, Town Council. I did have a little difficulty in trying to determine what the request is that's in front of the board, whether it's an appeal of the revocation or whether it's the request for a new permit with conditions. If this is in fact a revocation, I do think one possibility, if the existing permit is technically still active
until December 31st,
that this board could consider sort of splitting the difference, which is, there was a comment made about treating everybody the same. Well, we know that there was a party in town that had chickens without a permit whatsoever, and they were forced to remove them completely. In this instance, you have an owner that had a permit but exceeded the number of animals that were allowed under that permit. Every other permit owner that was complying with their limit, but that was improperly issued a permit, has been allowed to keep them till the end of the year until it's time to get a new permit. So I think one option the board may want to consider is allowing this applicant to keep the number of birds that they had under their permit, require them.
1 to 9.
Excuse me?
The 1 to 9.
Yeah, 1 to 9. And require anything above that, which then would not be in compliance with the permit, to be removed from the property until such time as it can be brought into compliance.
I'm not opposed to that. The difference is they violated the permit.
I understand that
Right?
fully.
That
and
puts
that is
them in a different position from everyone else.
And that is certainly a basis. I'm just trying to offer a potential alternative that sort of splits the difference.
Gentlemen?
I would be in support of that. At minimum, if we have the removal ordered to be the 7th, to make it the 11th after we vote for our regs. If we're talking Friday to Tuesday.
I think that Paul's suggesting to the 31st.
Well, the removal of any in excess of the 1 to 9 would have to be done sooner than that, because then you'd be treating them differently than any other applicant who would mistakenly be granted a permit.
How many do they have right now?
I believe 14 chickens.
And what about bunnies?
4.
Okay. Would they be willing to get rid of the 4 bunnies and 5 of their chickens?
Respectfully, if we could wait till December 31st, it would save a lot of emotional stress for these folks. I don't think I'm asking for something extraordinary here.
So I think he's saying that that's not acceptable.
I would lean towards a split. But I think that if
The
there's too
judge-
much, if we have too much difference between the way we address people,
That's the
opens us
problem.
to the racism, et cetera.
That's the problem.
I think December 31st is a compromise that we can live with, and we anticipate your board. It may very well be that you'll issue new regs, and my clients may be the very first people in to reapply for permits under your new regs that are fully compliant and would avoid the need for any of this, including fines. And
So I'm confused. What are you saying they're prepared to do?
they'll maintain the status quo till December 31st. If they can't become in compliance with your new regulations,
So
then
they
they'll be
will not-
subject to enforcement orders.
They will not reduce the chickens to 9,
They can't.
and they will not remove the bunnies.
That's correct. Not on an interim basis like that. That's correct.
Are the bunnies still outside, or are they still?
Outside. If you'd like them to be inside, my clients will want to make that accommodation.
So they're not accessory outdoor animals at that point?
So that's the compromise. If you want a pound of flesh, you just got your pound of flesh.
You know, Doug, that is really inappropriate.
No, it isn't. It's a direct look right in your eyes, comment directed right at you, who made a motion while sitting as a chair of a board
No.
when the motion should have been made by another member.
No, I
So,
said
yes.
I would entertain a motion, Doug.
No, you started the motion, but that's
I
okay.
said I would entertain a motion, okay?
I'm curious
So,
to hear Mr. Parley's comment.
Our council, town council has recommended that we allow them to keep 9 chickens and they can remove their bunnies.
9 outdoor accessory animals.
Right. And your clients are not going to make that compromise. So you're saying we allow them to keep everything to the 31st, even though we've never let that happen to anyone else. We've never, everyone else.
That you know about. That you know about. There are people that have done it, but you just don't know it.
But there is a situation that did occur this year in which an immediate removal was required, and this board, in order to protect the interests of the town, needs to make sure it is not treating people differently. So, I mean, certainly circumstances are not always exactly the same.
I agree.
But when you do have to follow your best efforts to make sure you're treating everyone the same.
I understand that.
And so, I mean, I do think that this is a reasonable compromise. I'm not sure that the December 31st deadline is really as helpful as maybe everyone would like it to be, because you'll still have to deal with the zoning implications. The December 31st deadline is really for the issuance of new Board of Health permits.
Right.
The way the regulations are currently drafted, any new permits would require compliance with zoning.
That's a different board, and I'll probably be seeing you at the zoning board on that issue, but for tonight, I'm...
Well, so, and that, that's a possibility. There are ways in which to seek relief under zoning requirements.
Exactly.
And perhaps, that's...
That may
one
be
way
our
to-
attitude, approach. I don't disagree with you, Paul. But for purposes tonight, I'm not going to get into the zoning
Although,
issues.
quite frankly, I would love for a situation to be where we can actually get full resolution and everybody's interests can be protected, which may include, sort of a peremptory action with regards to the zoning issue.
Mhm.
Once again, I will entertain a motion. Doug does not want me to suggest the terms of the motion, so I will allow one of you gentlemen to make a motion.
Okay.
Yep.
So make a motion.
If you'd like some assistance.
Yes.
With the phrasing, I would say the motion would be to grant the appeal, to reverse the revocation of the permit that was previously issued and to allow it to remain in place until December 31st, but to require that the applicant comply with the terms of that permit.
Or specify 1 to 9 outdoor accessory animals.
Correct.
So, motion?
I'll make the motion.
I made that motion.
And I'll second.
So to be clear, if we accept this motion, it is contingent upon your clients reducing their outdoor animals to 9. And if they do not, then they will still be in violation and the fine will start immediately at this point.
You mean by December 7th?
No, be immediate. That wasn't part of the motion.
The motion can be amended.
Can I amend my motion then?
Right ahead.
Let's amend the motion to December 7th.
To require compliance by December 7th.
Correct. So, Nick, did you have any other thoughts about
further
the 11th?
Nope.
So,
All right. All in favor of the motion?
aye.
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 Thank you very much.
All right.
Would you like to call the meeting to a close?
Well,
The public
I
hearing?
wanna
Do
call
we
the
have
meeting-
something else today?
I'm looking at that. I'll call the public hearing to a close. I'm trying to find my agenda.
Anything else on the next scheduled meeting is December 10th?
Next scheduled meeting is December 10th. There was an old business here, which was our domestic animal regulations. I really don't know why that was there. We weren't going to talk about those tonight. I hadn't planned on it.
What, the,
This item about old business.
I think it was
We
just,
can-
I think it was just there, Anne Marie, as the fact that we were gonna take input regarding it.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to move it to the next meeting, December 10th.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye. And our next meeting is at the Chelmsford Police Department. Motion to adjourn, gentlemen, one of you?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Seconded?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.